In June of 1891, a young man of 22 years of age finished law school in London and traveled to South Africa to be a lawyer. Immediately upon arriving in South Africa, he faced discrimination everywhere because of his skin color and heritage. One story is told that he boarded a stagecoach with other European passengers and was told to sit in the front on the floor by the driver. Another story that illustrates the discrimination he faced almost daily was he was walking the streets of Durban in South Africa, where he was beat up and harassed by the police for simply walking on a public walkway. When you hear words of discrimination, what do you think? Does it bother you? This man, Mahatma Gandhi, found it humiliating, struggling to understand how some people can feel honor or superiority or even pleasure in such inhumane practices. He began to question the empire's standing, that's India, in the British Empire. And so began his life that led him down ways to use innovative approaches to protest inhumanities and ultimately led to the freedom of India from Britain. So when I hear words like this, I feel sad, frustrated, but there's another word that may be coming to your mind as well, and that's anger. You know, sometimes people use this phrase for kind of a synonym for the word anger. Here it is, righteous indignation. Have you heard that before? You know, I'm personally uncomfortable with that word because us sinful humans, we're not righteous. And righteous indignation, when I've seen it used, implies there's an aura of superiority, one person being better or more right or more knowledgeable than the other. We see way too much of that in this world today, don't we? A better phrase for what I'd like us to use today is the word moral frustration. We all know how the story of Mahatma Gandhi goes. He led the concept of nonviolent protest and ultimately the freedom of India. You know, we see images like this and we see a peaceful man. We see him smiling. We see him with those round glasses, and we think he's a peaceful man. But did you know that he had a grandson? And his grandson actually wrote a book, and this book is right here. It's called The Gift of Anger, Lessons from My Grandfather. As we study the cleansing of the temple by Jesus, we're going to explore this difficult subject of moral frustration. We are continuing this series in the book of Mark, and we're going to be reading from Mark 11, verses 15 through 17. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." You know, the story of Jesus cleansing the temple is described in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke describe this event at the end of Jesus' ministry, while the book of John has it at the beginning, found in John chapter 2. Most scholars believe that Jesus cleansed the temple twice in his ministry. So what we're going to do is we're going to exercise something maybe you don't use very often, but we're going to use our imagination. And I want us to use our imagination in this sermon and think about a few things. Imagine that you are there in Jerusalem during Jesus' time, and you are there as a witness to both of his temple cleansings. How would you feel? what would you be thinking? Think about those 3.5 years between the two cleansings. You've seen him love. You've seen him heal. You've heard him preach, and you've seen him teach. And you've seen him pouring out his life for his people. And you ask yourself, after 3.5 years and doing everything that he did, what changed in their behavior? Would you feel sadness, frustration, or dare I say, anger? You know, I've had the opportunity, I have a lot of people asking me, I never see you here at Summit. Well, I've been actually teaching a Bible study for the last 6 months, and I've been using these lessons, and I have one of them here. They're called Truth Link. And actually, we have them in our lobby as well. And after first service, I see that we're almost actually out of them. But I have been really impressed with these lessons. You know, the previous lessons we had, you've seen the pictures. I kind of view it as shock and awe, scare tactics. You've seen it, the beast, the mark, all of this. But with these Truth Link lessons, what I find is there's the single most important truth that we need to know, and it is God is love. And so studying these lessons has shown that every one of them, and that's the most important thing for us to know. A few weeks ago, we were studying lesson 7 here. I have it here in my hand. It's entitled Journey to the Heart of God. And in this lesson, we studied about the design of the tabernacle. And I've got a picture here that we'll see of the tabernacle, but we've all seen it. You've got, of course, the courtyard. You have the altar. You have the laver of washing. And you have the holy place and the most holy place. And there's all pieces of furniture, the table for showbread. We've got the lampstand, the Ark of the Covenant. But you know what we learned in this lesson? We learned that each area in the tabernacle symbolized a specific phase of the plan of salvation. And each furniture in the tabernacle symbolized a specific aspect of Christ's ministry for us. You know, the tabernacle represents a beautiful sentiment. That's why the name of this lesson, Journey to the Heart of God, is so beautiful. You know, a journey implies that you have a map, and that map represents a guide as we journey to find that heart of God. And what do you find at the end of that journey when we get to the heart of God? We see love. Now, let's use our imaginations again and compare and contrast that with what we see in the temple with Jesus. What do we see? We see blatant abuse. We certainly see robbery. And dare I say, we see racism. We see the opposite of love. You know, there's a few important lessons for us when we look at Jesus cleansing the temple. You know, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Vietnam. And, you know, we live now in most Western countries that we are a cashless society. And I was thinking about my wallet here. I haven't actually carried any physical money in months, maybe even a year. Most Western countries are kind of like that. But when I was traveling into Vietnam, I thought, well, it's probably a good idea to have some local currency just in case. Now, the Vietnamese currency is called the dong, the Vietnamese dong, D-O-N-G. And I was searching last night in my house. I know I've got some of this currency around, but I couldn't find it. But I have actually a picture of what it looks like. And if you're looking at this picture, yes, that is right. 500,000 of the Vietnamese dong. And so you think to yourself, wow, 500,000 Vietnamese dong, that's going to be a lot of money for me to get by. Well, you know, I always travel with the currency conversion app. And so before I land, or just as I land, I open it up, and I look at the exchange rate of the US dollar to the Vietnamese dong. And basically that $500,000 Vietnamese dong note is worth a little bit more than $20. Here's the currency conversion rate. If you try and do the math on the left-hand side, you know, one Vietnamese dong is far less than a single US penny. In fact, if you were to round it, it's worth nothing. So I had 3 million Vietnamese dong, and that was worth barely over $100. But you've all seen this. If you've traveled internationally, you land go through immigration, and then you're in the baggage claim. And we've all seen these currency conversion stations like this picture right here. So I was waiting for my bags to come out, and I looked, and sure enough, it was basically $20 US for 350,000 Vietnamese dong. The unknowing would think, wow, this is a great deal. But in actuality, it was highway robbery. There were people intentionally preying on visitors, trying to make an extra buck, or a dong in this case. The people they were taking advantage of were likely visiting for the first time. It was extremely difficult for me to get a visa to go into Vietnam. And they were taking advantage of those that were arriving in Vietnam for the first time ever. You know, I was in Vietnam for a week. It is a beautiful country. Got a lot of stories I could tell, but you know what my one lasting impression is of Vietnam? You got it. It was that experience in the airport. Travel tip is you never use those currency conversion booths. You either go to an ATM, even it's better to go out into the main landing hall than to use those that are right by the baggage claim that are preying on the unknowing. We know how much love Jesus had for those people that were visitors, the ones that fell on hard times, that were struggling, that were outcasts. We think of the widow's mite, the woman at the well, the Beatitudes, Jesus' parables, even Jesus' last parable where he ends with, "For I was hungry and you gave me no food, naked and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison and you did not visit me." The people that were marginalized were very important to Jesus. You can, as you think about this, there's another lesson. You know, here we are in God's temple. We see people taking advantage intentionally of others for monetary gain. You know, when you think about it, it's simply horrific. And we all, I think if we use our imagination, would be morally frustrated with Jesus when we imagine those scenes in front of us. You know, there's another important observation if we were an eyewitness to Jesus cleansing the temple. Have you ever seen a map of Jesus and the temple in Jerusalem? I've got a map right here that I'll show you. And if you look at the picture, there's a set of courts that you see. Outside, there's the court of the Gentiles. There's also the court of the women, the court of Israel, and the court of the priests. And in the center of that picture, you can see that there's actually the temple itself. Well, immediately, without me explaining what all those courts are about, you can see there's some sort of segregation or classification, profiling going on right here. And you're right. You know, the court of the Gentiles is also referred to as the outer court. The outer court was where the merchants were selling items. This was also the only part of the temple where non-Jews were allowed to go. In fact, there's a museum in Turkey, in Istanbul, and they have a warning sign. Well, it's kind of more of a stone, but it's something that archaeologists found in 1871 from Jerusalem that goes back to the time of the temple in Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. I have a picture of that stone, and it's kind of worn off, but it was engraved, carved out in the stone, and they'd use red paint to really highlight the words. You want to know what those words said? They're shocking, so listen to this. "Let no foreigner enter the parapet and the partition which surrounds the temple precincts." Catch this. "Anyone caught will be held accountable for his ensuing death." Wow, that's rolling out the welcome mat. You might remember that Paul, on his last visit to Jerusalem, was accused of taking a Greek, the Greek's name was Trophimus, into one of the forbidden courtyards. The mob beat him and had the intent to kill him. It was only really the quick action of a Roman garrison commander that preserved Paul's life on that occasion. We can read this event from Acts 21, verses 27 through 33. Now, when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who teaches all men everywhere," he's referring to Paul there, "against the people, the law, and this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And all the city was disturbed, and the people ran together, seized Paul, and dragged him out of the temple. And immediately the doors were shut. Now, as they were seeking to kill him, news came to the commander of the garrison that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately took the soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains. And he asked who he was and what he had done. So let's go back to using our imaginations. We just saw and read about the experience of Paul, falsely accused of something, by the way. And then we see the scene of Jesus cleansing the temple twice. Simple question for you. Is this an environment to worship and pray? So let's use our imagination one more time and imagine you're now a Samaritan living in Jesus' day, and you decide you want to go to Jerusalem and go to the temple and pray. The only place you're allowed to go to is the outer court. You know what? As I look in this sanctuary here, I don't see very many Jews here. You know what? We would be considered Gentiles as well, and we'd be in the outer court as well. Think about it. Imagine. What about the noise, the chaos, the smells? Is this a place to come and worship and pray? You know, this gives new light to Mark 11:17. My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. And so here I am, a Samaritan in the temple. What kind of example is this showing to me? Would it be possible for me to pray in the noise and the bustle? What would be my first and lasting impression of going to the outer court of the temple? Would I feel exploited, segregated, robbed, marginalized? You know, the offering of a dove were for those that could not afford a larger offering. So on top of all of this, they're overcharging those who could at least afford it. So here we are in the year 2021. We might not have the distractions of commerce in our church, but I worry what our first and lasting impression is. I worry whether people feel marginalized. Is our church one that is welcoming and inclusive, or is there a warning sign that threatens? I'm sure a lot of you noticed me bringing a baseball bat on stage. You know, a baseball bat, in the right context, say a baseball field, is normal. Me holding the baseball bat, something that you'd expect. Me tapping it on the ground, swinging, all to be expected if I'm on a baseball field. Me hitting as the bat is something you'd expect to see. However, here in this church, it is completely out of place. There are a lot of things that were out of place when Jesus cleansed the temple. Was it a welcoming environment for strangers? Strike one. Were they creating barriers for the temple being a place for all nations to worship? That's strike two. Was it a worshipful environment? Well, that's strike three. You know, in the Old Testament, there are over 15 verses in Scripture that speak to the importance of not mistreating foreigners. Exodus 22:21, do not mistreat an alien or oppress him, for you were aliens in Egypt. Zechariah 7:10, and oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the sojourner, nor the poor, and let none of you devise evil against his brother in your heart. So again, let's use our imagination. You're a Samaritan, a visitor, a stranger, not really wanted, who traveled a long distance to get to the temple. And when we arrived, we were worshiping in the outer court with the sheep, the goats, and the doves. How does this sit with you? Would you feel your trip to the house of God for worship and prayer was worth it? Well, let's fast forward today. You're exactly right. This bat down here, out of place. So are the things that isolate people, divide people, and prevents people from worshiping. Let's be clear. It does not matter what someone looks like, how they dress, their age, their religious background, their culture, their race, their color, whether someone is vaccinated or not. God wants this to be a house of worship for all nations. Over the 3.5 years that Jesus ministered on this earth, I can only imagine how morally frustrated he was. Even his disciples who were with him missed the inclusive nature who Jesus was at times. You know, the Bible and the Gospels do use the word anger in describing some of Jesus' actions. There is, of course, a huge difference between Jesus' righteous indignation, and I think that word is perfectly appropriate for Jesus, and our anger. You know, in James 1:19 through 20, you've read this. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So what happened in the 3.5 years between the two temple cleansings? What changed in terms of their actions? How much have we changed? I was recently talking to a group about our mission here in Keene. You know, we did a lot of work on this actually prior to COVID. We had a mission statement, we have values. In fact, if you're in the lobby and look on one of the walls, we have our mission statement, living God's love. And how do we do this? We love, we connect, and we share. We spent a lot of time working on the mission and our values to reflect who we are and the missionary role every one of us plays for God. So, I know that all of us have felt moral frustration in some way or another. You may be feeling it right now. Well, let me let you into a little secret. It's okay. You know what? I'm morally frustrated as well. I'm morally frustrated with this number right here, 4,369. This represents the number of rockets that were fired between the Palestinians and the Israelis in the month of May. You know, I have a personal friend that lives in Tel Aviv. You realize their building codes are different than ours, and it's required that you have one room that is more protected, more thick, to prevent, hopefully, a missile from damaging and killing individuals. We see the pictures and the devastation that happened in the Gaza Strip. Entire buildings coming down, lives lost. I am morally frustrated with 4,369. I am morally frustrated with the number 899. This is the number of mass shooting victims in the United States in the year 2021. You know, we discuss important topics like the Second Amendment rights, gun rights, assault rifles, and then we lose track of the 899 people that no longer are living because of violence. You know, here's a scary fact. Do you know historically more mass shooting events happen in the second half of the year? And I am absolutely morally frustrated with 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The amount of time that a police officer knelt on the neck of George Floyd. What we've learned with Jesus' cleansing of the temple is that it's important how we use our moral frustration in ways to improve, to uplift, to motivate, and to love, to be proponents of change and not bystanders that complain. But you know what the really amazing, important part with Jesus cleansing the temple was? Let's use our imagination one last time. You're a Samaritan and you're witnessing Jesus actually cleansing the temple. How would you feel? Would you feel relief that you're being recognized as a human? Would you feel excitement that there is someone defending you? Would you feel hope that Jesus was morally frustrated for you? And here's the amazing part. Jesus did it in such a way that the children who witnessed this were not afraid. If we read the same story as described in Matthew 21, after the cleansing of the temple, it reads that the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and the children cried out, "Hosanna to the Son of David." We should never get comfortable as to where we are. It's okay to be morally frustrated, but we need to use our moral frustration to continue to strive forward, to be inclusive, to be loving, to be that beacon of light to others, and be the church that God has called us to be, each and every one of us. We all have this power through God to use our moral frustration to be proponents of change. But the question is how? You're like, Pastor Rick, I've heard this. But how do I use my moral frustration to make improvements? You know what you're morally frustrated with, Rick, with those numbers, those are big issues. And you're right. But there is an approach called the theory of change. I have used it. It's used very commonly in the business world, and it can be very effective. Let me explain, and the best way for me to explain is to give you a little story here. Imagine that you want to buy a wardrobe closet, something like this picture here. You know, it's something where you can hang up your coats. It's got drawers on the side, and you really want it, and you like kind of that European look. And the first thing that comes to your mind is IKEA furniture store. We've all been there. All 20 different sections, takes hours to go through. I get tired just thinking about it. So you say to yourself, well, I'm gonna be smarter. I see exactly what I want. I go to their website. That's the wardrobe closet that I want. So you order it. A week later, all 10 boxes arrive at your door. You open up those boxes there, and to your horror, you realize there's no instructions. Well, you're a smart person, and you decide you're gonna put it together yourself. After a few hours, you look like this. You are completely frustrated that none of those 1,000 parts are going together to make a wardrobe closet. So what do? This is where the theory of change comes in. You think about it for a while. You know the end result of what you want to get to. You see a picture of that wardrobe closet on one of the boxes. You see it on the website. And you realize, well, there's a frame, there's a door, and there's 6 drawers. So you sort everything out in the room, and you focus on just one thing, putting one drawer together. And then the second drawer, and then the second drawer, and the third, and the fourth. And your 1,000 parts go down to 800, to 600, to 400. And before you know it, you finally end up with a completed wardrobe closet. That's the theory of change. God has called each one of us to be a champion of change for him. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, but God can take your moral frustrations, I've seen it before, and use them in positive ways to drive change for the better. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Dear Jesus, We thank you for your lessons as you cleanse the temple. May you use our moral frustrations to be change agents for you to remove barriers, to be inclusive, and to draw others to you in love. Amen.